Over the last few months, Anomaly Research Labs has been studying the research of Dr. Andrew Ivy and Dr. Stephen Jurovic. Stepping away from electromagnetic healing, this time we will be talking about a drug made to combat cancer. To do so, we will have to turn the clock back to the mid-1900s. Krebiozen was described as worthless by the AMA, ACS, and the federal government. However, in Neptune, New Jersey, Miss Julia Harnett and Dr. Anthony DeSpirito were interviewed.
Kathy was a perfectly healthy baby when she was born. By her birth, she followed 3 wonderful boys. At the age of 4, simply because she looked so badly and her appetite was so poor, we had taken her to our family physician, and he told us she had to go into the hospital for tests. They decided there must be Rohn's tumor. After the operation, we were told there were so many organs removed from her, and the tumor itself was so very large and malignant that her chances for recovery was extremely poor. In order to prolong her for 6 months, 25 X-ray treatments were prescribed. Kathy was unable to tolerate them. We were further told that there was nothing further medical science could do for her. At this time, we turned to Krebiozen. Although we were only promised by Dr. Ivy a year for Kathy, to prolong her only for a year, Kathy reacted beautifully to it immediately. This child that hasn't been drinking and eating and playing began to eat, requesting foods and different things, and played little by little. She became a normal child.
On April 28th of 1960, she received her last X-ray treatment. A few days later, she was started on Krebiozen in New York City. When Mrs. Hodnett returned to her home, I refused to give Krebiozen because I knew very little about the drug and felt that there was no scientific evidence to the fact that it would help Kathy. A little later on, I began to give Kathy her Krebiozen again, much as I would give some psychotherapy to other patients. It was obviously not doing her any harm, but her improvement coincided with the stopping of X-ray therapy and the end of radiation sickness. Now, since Krebiozen was started and the child improved, the mother attributes her child's improvement to the Krebiozen. However, I must emphatically say that there is no true scientific evidence in this case that Krebiozen has been of any benefit.
If it's to be believed that Krebiozen didn't heal Kathy, then the only other argument can be that the tumours faded into thin air. As the doctors said, the X-rays and radiation wouldn't save her for more than 6 months. The government did, however, afford Krebiozen some credit, as they stated it was not toxic. Krebiozen was discovered by Dr. Stephen Jurovic. Originating in Yugoslavia, Dr. Jurovic went to the United States in 1949 after hiding in Argentina to avoid the Second World War. For 14 years he used Krebiozen on advanced cancer patients and animals, advocating for it to be given recognition for helping against cancer. Dr. Jurovic injected horses with a mold called Actinomycin bovis. In doing so, the horses became ill. This caused them to secrete into their blood a growth-controlling substance that he named Krebiozen. This is not the only medication that is made from livestock. Some HRT medicine is derived from the urine of pregnant horses. When the horses are at their most sick, around 4 weeks after becoming ill, the horses are bled. Using dialysis to break down the blood into red blood cells and the serum used to create Krebiozen. In 1961, it took 200 horses to produce 5 grams of Krebiozen. Between this and the Horse in Our Harry Hoxsey documentary, it occurs to me we don't celebrate our equine friends enough. The final stage of the production of Krebiozen took place at Promac Lab in Chicago via the use of an organic solvent, which is evaporated. The residue is extracted multiple times with distilled water to produce a semi-crystalline material, after which Krebiozen is complete, in which stage it is advertised as a hormone. Dr. Jurovic stated that every ampule used by a patient contains 1/100th of a milligram of Krebiozen, of which is dissolved in 1 cubic centimeter of mineral oil. Promac Labs made Krebiozen for the Krebiozen Research Foundation in order to prove its worth. Krebiozen faced enormous opposition from the government and the medical industry. Dr. Andrew Ivy was the only man stood between Dr. Jurovic and obscurity. Having gained various honorary degrees and international awards, Dr. Ivy was the organizer of the Naval Medical Research Institute of Bethesda, Maryland. He was also a former board member of the American Cancer Society, as well as vice president to the University of Illinois from 1946 to 1953. Dr. Ivy was also employed by the AMA, which he would later come to regret. Take note that this high-flying figure in the medical world carefully examined Krebiozen and stated in clear terms that he wanted further research. When Dr. Ivy entered his 70s, he dedicated most of his time to Krebiozen research. Alongside his wife, they compiled statistics from over 4,000 case histories. Ivy also examined the chemical makeup of Krebiozen in order to make it simpler and less expensive to create, as well as giving the horses an easier time. He kept in touch with 50 advanced cancer patients and gave them free Krebiozen in order to track its effectiveness. Dr. Ivy also discovered that he could derive Krebiozen from horse tissue instead of serum. The scientific community discredited Dr. Ivy. In this book, it is recorded that the university president George Stoddard disliked that Ivy was working with a Yugoslavian. For this, he was fired as vice president. Not to be outdone though, Dr. Ivy left the AMA. Dr. Ivy and Dr. Jurovic were interviewed by William Cronick at Promac Labs in Chicago.
Dr. Ivy, what first convinced you that Krebiozen might have value in the treatment of cancer?
Well, I was convinced first because since 1917 I have believed that there is an anti-cancer substance in the blood serum and tissues of multicellular animals. When Dr. Jurovic came to me in August 1949 and told me that he had isolated such a substance from the blood serum of horses and had shown that it is effective, and I saw the protocols in dogs and cats with spontaneous advanced cancer, then I was convinced that it should be tried on the human patients with advanced cancer. So we started, and within 3 or 4 weeks, I had seen myself a decrease in size of the tumor and a decrease in pain.
Despite your claims, Dr. Ivy, the medical profession as a whole has said that a test is not justified because your patients didn't have cancer in the first place, because the results you claimed came from delayed X-ray and surgical treatment, and because you were not qualified to interpret the clinical results.
Let's take up each question separately. First, I am not qualified. I've been doing cancer research and seeing patients with cancer since 1917. And furthermore, facts speak for themselves. The charge that the patients did not have cancer in the first place is simply not true. Such a charge could not be made by any person who had gone over our records, because they would find that there was a microscopic diagnosis of the tumor and past history, generally of surgery, with a microscopic diagnosis on the specimen. Regarding the third charge, that the favorable results were due to delayed surgery or X-ray therapy, I should like to point out that we have a relatively large group of patients who received neither X-ray nor surgery, and the results were the same.
If all this is true, Dr. Ivy, why is organized medicine so strongly opposed to Krebiozen?
Because in October 1951, a report was published in the Journal of the American Medical Association, which concluded that Krebiozen had practically no value, or implied that it had no value, and it also mentioned that Krebiozen is a secret remedy. I tried to reply and tell the truth about Krebiozen, but I was turned down. And at the present time, the doctors in this country only have available to them this inaccurate report in the Journal of the American Medical Association. we can prove that the AMA report was partially falsified and entirely superficial.
Dr. Durovic, one charge that has been made repeatedly is that Krebiozen is a secret remedy because you never have fully disclosed the manufacturing process.
This is simply not true. Since 1951, Dr. Ivy and I have disclosed and published many times the technological data regarding production of Krebiozen. This was done first time in 1951, thereafter in 1954, 56, 59, and last time in 1961 in now report to National Cancer Institute.
In order to spike that charge, I have publicly been inviting anyone who really wants to know how to make Krebiozen to come to my laboratory and work 1 or 2 months without salary, and they will learn how to make it. No one has accepted this invitation until about a month ago, when a medical student whose mother had hopeless cancer came to my laboratory and said that he wanted to learn how to make Krebiozen and all other aspects of the subject of Krebiozen.
This has strong parallels with Harry Hoxsey brazenly stating he'd gladly be subject to clinical research.
And when I say to you, all I want is to have them come here. The American Medical Association, the Pure Food and Drug, the federal government, anybody, come here and make an investigation. And if I don't prove to them beyond any question of a doubt that our treatment is superior to radium X-ray and surgery, then I will lock the doors of this institution forever.
Dr. Durovic, another charge is that your Promac Laboratories has made a great deal of money from the distribution of Krebiozen.
This is another false statement. Krebiozen never was sold. From 1949 until 1954, all Krebiozen was given at no cost to anyone. In 1954, our financial resources were exhausted, and we wrote to our research physicians that we would have to stop our study if they do not help us to pay cost of production and other expenses. Without exception, their reply was that we should not stop our study and that they will get some financial help from their patient for us. Since then, patients are contributing for Krebiozen according to their ability. However, majority of the patients have received Krebiozen without any contribution. And no patient were refused Krebiozen on the basis of his financial inability.
In 1951, Dr. Ivy first announced Krebiozen by calling a meeting of doctors, cancer experts, and science journalists. But an unauthorized press release, which Dr. Ivy stated he did not issue, caused an uproar in the public. To this moment, its origin is unknown. Due to the enormous public interest, the AMA began a full-scale investigation of the drug. In October 1951, they made a report on 100 cases which concluded that the histories did not count as evidence of Krebiozen having value. Its supporters disagreed with the report's conclusions, primarily because it contained 23 false cases, and that 12 patients the AMA claimed were dead or dying were in good health. When I first read this, my mind immediately went to the 58 basic medical errors in Henri Paul's autopsy. Krebiozen was subject to 2 further reports that sought to discourage further investigation. Dr. Ivy almost single-handedly kept Krebiozen in the fight for market approval, so much so that in 1953 the Illinois legislators appointed a commission to investigate if Krebiozen and its supporters were being unduly harassed. At the hearing was Dr. J.J. Moore of the AMA, a pathologist who was also the AMA treasurer when the AMA report on Krebiozen came out. Jurovic charged Dr. Moore with trying to make him give distribution rights to the drug to 2 businessmen, of which were friends of Dr. Moore, and that when Jurovic refused, Moore threatened to tarnish the reputations of Dr. Ivy, Dr. Jurovic, and Krebiozen, using his leverage in the AMA and the university. Dr. Ivy stated under oath that he faced threats and pressure from the AMA to stop helping Krebiozen.
I had a call from a former student of mine, whose name I do not now recall, who said that there were certain people out to get me, and then the same afternoon, and that's why I recall it so well, a reporter of the Chicago paper called me up and asked me if I knew that certain individuals were out to get my job at the University of Illinois. And I said, no, it's news to me. Then it also confirmed the story which came to me from a Mr. Lauritani, who formerly worked with the Durovics down in Buenos Aires, Argentina, in which he had visited the offices of the AMA and came back to the Durovics with the story that if I didn't get out of this Krebiozen investigation, I'd lose my job at the university.
Moore was not legally required to testify at the committee, but in the presence of an interviewer, he said this.
My interest in Krebiozen is to prevent the exploitation and misleading of the American cancer public. Someone must defend that group, and there's no group that can defend them, such as the physician. We are the ones that know what cures cancer, when a cancer is cured, and we're the ones that take care of cancer.
Well, Dr. Moore, what leads you to believe that Krebiozen is of no value in the treatment of cancer?
My own personal experience with the drug and obtaining it for physicians on some of the Southside hospitals, that every patient that has received Krebiozen that I have obtained for the physician, and all those that I know have died from cancer. And also, it was backed up by the report of the Institute of Medicine of Chicago, the article in the Journal of the American Medical Association, the Council of the Chicago Medical Society, the Executive Committee of the College of Medicine of the University of Illinois, and the Cole Committee of the University of Illinois, which says that this drug is practically valueless in the treatment of cancer.
Notice how he said that you should take the AMA report as being proof that Krebiozen doesn't work, but didn't quote anything from it? Keep that in mind for later. The hearings were strenuous for both sides. After locking horns for almost a year, it was fought to a draw, as it was concluded that there was no conspiracy against Krebiozen, but also that it did deserve further investigation. Standing against the media storm brought on it by the AMA, Krebiozen continued to be produced for more than a decade. Dr. Ivy was not to be outdone, as he kept some of his prestige in the medical world, never faltering from his duty. Thanks to him, stage 4 cancer patients, their doctors, and the media began questioning if Krebiozen needed further research. It also drew the attention of Herbert Bailey, who in 1948 wrote A Matter of Life and Death. Senator Douglas, having looked at Krebiozen, joined forces with Dr. Ivy, going so far as to advocate for the government to provide Krebiozen with a fair test to determine its worth. During February 1963, the government, against the advice of the AMA, began photostating and studying 500 Krebiozen case histories with a view to deciding if they should be undertaken by the National Cancer Institute. Among the group study was what Ivy called the best example of Krebiozen's value, 24-year-old Gary Cathcart. Gary's father recalled that his tumour could not be removed. Under a biopsy, it was found that the tumour was stage 4. Subject to 2 more X-rays, the tumour's size had doubled, becoming 8 inches in diameter. Gary was told he would live for only a few weeks. However, in June of 1951, he started using Krebiozen. In the span of a meagre 4 weeks, the tumour was only 1 inch in diameter. The next month, a surgeon said that the recovery might have been due to the X-rays, and advised Gary to stop using Krebiozen, as Kathy Harnett was told. In the absence of Krebiozen, the tumour regrew to 2 inches in diameter, compelling Gary to restart the treatment. 3 months later, it fell to half an inch. In January of 1952, the tumour grew back to the size of when the treatment was stopped. Gary increased the dose of Krebiozen, and 4 months later, there was no tumour to be found. Gary stayed on Krebiozen for the rest of his life, and in doing so was able to become a great mathematician. Note that Krebiozen had to be sustained, but still kept the cancer under control. His father credits Krebiozen with keeping his son alive. Dr. F. Allen Rutherford was interviewed by William Cronick, and had this to say about Krebiozen.
Dr. Rutherford, what has been your experience in treating cancer patients with Krebiozen?
It was about 9 years ago that I treated my first cancer patient with Krebiozen. This individual was dying and had received the last rites of his church before I gave the injection. 5 weeks afterwards, he returned to work, and he didn't miss a day for 7 years on account of illness. The age brackets between 3 and 1/2 years and 83 years. 97% of the patients that come to me for Krebiozen therapy have been far advanced or terminal and considered hopeless. Since that, my first case, I have treated 331 others with Krebiozen. Based on my experience, I consider Krebiozen offers more hope for the cancer victim than any other therapy that I have used.
Has your use of Krebiozen affected you professionally in any way?
It certainly has. There was 2 cancer patients sent home from the hospital to die. They came to me for Krebiozen therapy, and after a certain length of time which they received this treatment, they returned to work, and as a result, I was expelled from the hospital staff. I demanded a hearing, received it. I was reinstated and vindicated for what I had done.
What is your opinion, sir, of a Krebiozen test being conducted by the National Cancer Institute?
I think that the National Cancer Institute should conduct a test. The reason they're not doing it because I believe that they think that we have a therapy that helps these cancer cases, and that is the main reason why they're not doing this test. If Krebiozen was worthless, as they claim, they'd run the test tomorrow. And since they've done everything possible to prevent a test, I believe they don't want the test to be done.
He wasn't alone, as Dr. Aaron Greenberg also advocated that Krebiozen deserved a clinical trial, going so far as to use it for years to determine its effectiveness.
Dr. Greenberg, what has your experience been in treating cancer patients with Krebiozen?
My experience has been that in most of the cases, even those who have died have at least had the benefit of some relief from the agonizing pain which very often is associated with cancer, more than one would expect just by the use of narcotics alone. And in at least 2 cases, I'm firmly convinced that a curative effect was effective. I certainly feel that this is a non-toxic drug. I feel that there is some merit in it, both from the viewpoint that it relieves pain, that it keeps patients functional during whatever period of time they have to live, and that in an occasional case, it seems to affect a cure.
Has your use of Krebiozen affected your practice?
I don't believe so. My practice has certainly, after 30 years, been as extensive as it ever has, as much as I would want to do. And so far as my hospital practice is concerned, I have seen no change whatsoever. I still have all the privileges that I ever have had, other than the fact that I have been unable to use Krebiozen in the hospital.
Do you think the National Cancer Institute should conduct a Krebiozen test?
Yes, I very definitely do feel that. I think that it's absolutely necessary that a large enough group, a scientific group, should test this on a large enough series of cases so that we can determine once and for all whether or not this is advantageous or not.
Chronic also interviewed Dr. John Pick, a plastic surgeon who practiced general medicine and helped Dr. Ivy write Observations on Krebiozen in the Management of Cancer.
Since that revealing experience 13 years ago, and covering an experience with over 1,300 patients, I have seen similar results and better. From one extreme to the other, from the complete disappearance of cancer to what we call the arrested case, in consequence of which I have devoted these last 13 years
in cooperation with Dr. Ivy, to put this material to crucial and responsible testing. And the results have been far more encouraging, both statistically and actually, than I have had in using any other form of drug or medicine in the treatment of cancer.
Has your use of and association with Krebiozen affected you professionally?
Well, seriously, I don't know of anyone who has been connected with Krebiozen that has not been affected in one way or another. Personally, of course, I have too. Not being disposed to complain, I'll just put it into a few words. It has been made rather difficult for me in several hospitals in Chicago to get time to operate or to get patients into the hospital. And of course, these things, as is the case with any highly integrated organization, are always done in a rather subtle manner. They are not put in writing.
Do you think a fair test of Krebiozen is possible?
The objective test is possible qualifiedly under one condition, that someone like Dr. Ivy, with an enormous experience in the use of this material, be in some way allowed to be a part of the picture in the testing. Otherwise, the test is still possible but meaningless.
Not one, not two, but 3 experienced doctors advocated for a deeper reading into Krebiozen. Dr. Ivy recounted that 4,200 cancer patients sought Krebiozen in its first 12 years, of which 10 to 12% survived between 4 and 12 years. The AMA stated that the reports on Krebiozen were gathered and interpreted unscientifically. The American Cancer Society agreed with the AMA, with Dr. Howard Bierman saying,
about 1951, shortly after Krebiozen was reported, there was an intensive study of this drug made at the University of California. Approximately 50 cases were studied in the course of the next 2 or 3 years, and I had the opportunity as the Associate Director of the Laboratory of Experimental Oncology, which was a branch of the National Cancer Institute, to observe some of these cases. And then, since that time, I have seen cases who have been treated with Krebiozen, who have been purported to have been helped and some not. And then, on occasion, we have employed Krebiozen on direct trial ourselves, alone or with, and in conjunction with other agents. I have never seen any significant subjective, that is, improvement in well-being, a decrease in pain, the things that the patient himself describes, or objective benefit from this drug, the objective symptoms being a regression in size of the tumor or a decrease in size of the mass observed on an X-ray film or by direct measurement.
Do you feel this experience is conclusive, that the drug could have no value?
In my own personal experience, from what I have actually observed, and from what I have read, and in conversations with other qualified investigators who have had experience with this agent, I would say it is not valid. I would like to add, however, that this all is a great disappointment to those of us who are actively engaged in cancer research and cancer treatment, and that we had anxiously hoped for an effective agent and indeed desperately need one.
In light of the negative results you witnessed and the government's findings, do you feel that a National Cancer Institute test is justified?
You mean clinical trial on patients? I would say it is not justified. On the basis that this particular chemical agent would therefore deprive patients of the use of more conventional, effective therapy. On the other hand, I would feel that if is convinced that there is effectiveness in this compound, that the correct place for trial at this time would be in the animal field.
Originally, I had a very scornful paragraph written here, but while editing this, I noticed that Dr. Bierman looks and sounds like he doesn't want to say most of this. I'm not a body language expert, but watch it a few times and you might agree he doesn't sound like a man with a grudge against Krebiozen. He sounds like a man frightened to lose his job. Also, he makes a good point about animal trials. In February 1963, the FDA bluntly told Dr. Jurovic that if he didn't file by June 7th, a plan for more research into Krebiozen complete with a detailed safety, efficacy, composition and manufacture, and results prior to testing, then the FDA would ban interstate shipment. Note that they had more reach and ability to ban medicine now, due to the thalidomide tragedy. This led to Krebiozen users joining forces to advocate en masse during a May press conference in New York City.
There's no more fundamental right that a man has than to fight for his own life. Even the worst criminal is given a fair trial and due process of law before his life is taken away from him.
On June the 27th, next month, the 20th next month, it is 7 years that Pat started his Krebiozen therapy. There he is. Stand up, Pat.
Refusing to let Krebiozen go without a fight, the patients and their families traveled to Washington, D.C. With help from Senator Douglas, they were able to present their cases before Congress. The meeting took place on the historic date of June 6th. After Senator Douglas advocated for a fair trial of Krebiozen, Dr. Jurovic filed an application for examination on June the 7th. The next day, FDA investigators arrived at Promac Laboratories and demanded Krebiozen for research. Dr. Jurovic gave it to them reluctantly, and quickly filed an injunction against them and their higher-ups in the Department of Health, Education and Welfare, charging them with harassment. Following this, newspapers quoted FDA employees off the record, saying that Krebiozen would soon be banned. On July 12th, Dr. Jurovic withdrew his application. Krebiozen was banned from interstate distribution 3 years later. When interviewed, Dr. Jurovic had this to say.
Dr. Jurovic, why did you withdraw your application from the Food and Drug Administration?
Federal Food and Drug Administration was harassing me and trying to smear me by giving false statements to the press or threatening me for indictment. If they succeeded, they would have given an excuse to the National Cancer Institute for not conducting the test on Krebiozen. Therefore, I withdraw my application to protect our chances for this test, which can resolve all this controversy.
Krebiozen was made unavailable outside of Illinois. The FDA expressed no mercy as they investigated its creation and costs. While this took place, the National Cancer Institute appointed 24 researchers to study 504 Krebiozen cases. There is not much left that shocks me in this line of work, but I found an exception in this footage. Patients and their families marched outside the White House against the ban, fearful for their lives in August. Senators Douglas, Keating, Javits, and Orber, among other lawmakers, introduced to Congress a joint resolution that the National Institute of Health be given $250,000, which is $2.5 million in today's money, to provide for Krebiozen a fair, controlled, and impartial test. In September of 1963, the FDA held a press conference and made this charge against Krebiozen.
You have before you now a statement of the department which says that Krebiozen has been identified by the Food and Drug Administration as a well-known chemical, creatine.
The FDA made the claim that Krebiozen was creatine masquerading as a cancer cure. This was supported by 4 separate research groups. 2 days after the conference, Dr. Ivy was interviewed in Chicago.
Everybody knows that Krebiozen is dissolved or is soluble in mineral oil, number 9 light mineral oil. But creatine is not soluble in number 9 light mineral oil. Anybody can test that for themselves. The molecular weight of creatine is 131. If it has a molecule of water in it, the molecular weight is 149. But the molecular weight reported to us by two different microchemical laboratories for Krebiozen is 7 times larger approximately, namely 924.
4 days later, Dr. Ivy and Dr. Jurovic took another stand against the FDA in a press conference. Dr. Jurovic showed a letter saying the FDA was wrong, that their studies were incomplete, and charged that the results were made to smear him. You recall when we said that J.J. Moore didn't list what his evidence was? Well, this is it, that Andrew Ivy, who was invited to share his expertise at the Nuremberg trials, couldn't spot the difference between Krebiozen and creatine. I've heard some dumb excuses while making these documentaries, but that one is the gold medalist so far. It would be funny if it wasn't so insulting. Getting back to Dr. Jurovic, he renewed the offer to join Dr. Ivy in cooperating with the FDA to provide the chemical makeup of Krebiozen and establish that it is well manufactured. On the subject of the cost, a Krebiozen user emphatically stated,
And when we have money, we will contribute more than $9.50 an ampule. We will contribute to the foundation to the end of our lives. Even, and this particular case happens to have been halted. It was an end-stage case with Krebiozen. Pain was halted, sleeplessness was halted, coughing as a cancer was halted, and we will continue to contribute. Let this be my final answer to you on the financial aspect of this issue.
Who are you with?
I am Alexander Gabriel. I have been 17 years correspondent with the United Nations. I'm known to the international community. I'm with the Trans-Radio News Agency and have been there as their chief correspondent at the head. I have my wife right over there, who is a blooming girl. After this treatment, and she can come out and show it to you. All the people in the UN tell her how well she looks now, and she did not look before. She was written off by one of the biggest internists in the United States, right here in the city of New York. And I was a skeptic of Krebiozen, and I stumbled across it, and I have studied it. I know what the situation is. And I will say right now, right here, I have followed the whole campaign of the Food and Drug Administration. And the doctors here cannot say some things, and I will say it. The Food and Drug Administration has made an agreement in the White House in June with Dr. Ivy for them to file an application. And they did. And one of the most cardinal principles of that agreement, set up by Dr. Peter Bing of the White House, was that they would not be harassed, that any insufficiency of information would be dealt with and negotiated on the basis of good faith and goodwill. And I called the White House and spoke to Dr. Bing 48 hours later when harassment rumors came out of Chicago, and he admitted in so many words that my allegation that they breached this goodwill agreement. And this campaign in the press is on an unseemly approach to a scientific problem. It is not Krebiozen that is on the spot. It is not the doctors who are on the spot. It is the American conscience and the morality of the American government that is at stake.
I'll go a step further and say that you don't have to be American to want Krebiozen unobstructed. On the 15th of October 1963, the National Cancer Institute's report on 504 Krebiozen case histories went public. A unanimous agreement was made that Krebiozen had no value as an anti-cancer agent, stating also that there should be no investigation. Take note that the National Cancer Institute at one point argued with Harry Hoxsey. The NCI said that because Hoxsey didn't have medical records that proved his tonic worked, they would not investigate. Hoxsey reasoned that Morris Fishbein was unlawfully opposing him, but the NCI didn't believe him. A few years later, Morris Fishbein and the AMA were found guilty of slander against Harry Hoxsey. I won't be sorry for not putting any stock into what the NCI says either. Kenneth Edicott, the director of the NCI, and Beauphil A. Jones of the Department of Health, Education and Welfare were interviewed by William Cronick.
The Food and Drug Administration undertook an investigation of the drug. And it was largely through their efforts that we obtained the additional information on the drug and upon the cases, which permitted us to reach a conclusion as to clinical test. The discovery that the drug is creatine, coupled with the fact that we found no convincing evidence of any effectiveness in man, so far as we are concerned, closes the matter from a scientific standpoint. There would be no justification in carrying out a trial in man under these circumstances. Of the 504 cases selected from more than 5,000, which were studied by the panel of 24 experts, there were only 2 which might possibly be interpreted as representing a response from Krebiozen. The experts feel that this is about what one would expect in any random sample, and have concluded that Krebiozen is completely without effect.
What about Gary Cathcart? Dr. Ivy considered the boy one of his best cases.
Well, that is one of the 2, and here the reason, there's some reason to doubt just what this represents, because the diagnosis was established on the basis of a frozen section. There was never a permanent section prepared, so that there's some uncertainty as to just what type of tumor this patient had. Certainly, there has been a response, and the patient is still alive.
Mr. Jones, what does the Food and Drug Administration plan to do now regarding Krebiozen?
Well, as Dr. Endicott has pointed out, the scientific judgment as to the effectiveness of Krebiozen in the treatment of cancer has now been determined and concluded. The Food and Drug Administration is continuing its investigation of the activity of the sponsors of Krebiozen to determine whether or not there has in fact been violation of the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. If so, the normal procedures of the Food and Drug Administration related to its enforcement responsibility will be carried forward.
Then is there any way left, Dr. Endicott, for the Krebiozen sponsors to get the Cancer Institute to test the drug?
Honestly, the only thing that I can see that they can do is to find a new drug that works.
Where are my rotten tomatoes when I need them? Dr. Ivy was asked by William Cronick what he planned following the NCI stonewalling.
I shall continue my research activities on Krebiozen, which are, 1, to make it and to study its chemistry. Number 2, to treat some 50 patients with Krebiozen. Even if it should become illegal for other physicians to use Krebiozen in the state of Illinois, I shall continue all of my research activities on this subject.
Dr. Ivy, your involvement with Krebiozen over the years has caused you to lose many important positions and has resulted in personal attacks against you. As you look back now, do you have any regrets?
No, I have no regrets. I know the history of medical progress so well that personal attacks and difficulties do not bother me. Furthermore, when I first started to work on Krebiozen, I desired to stimulate other scientists in the field of cancer to become interested in and to confirm the Krebiozen theory, namely that an anti-cancer substance exists in all the multicellular animals and probably plants. During the past 2 years, the Krebiozen theory has been confirmed in part or in toto by at least 5 different groups of scientists in the United States. Finally, I've been fully repaid by the knowledge of the fact that I have helped relieve the pain in many patients with advanced and hopeless cancer, and also to prolong their lives.
This was the last time Dr. Ivy was interviewed in Krebiozen, 13 Years of Bitter Conflict. It's been a privilege to cover his work, and of course, let's not forget Dr. Jurovic, another admirable figure in the medical world. Senator Douglas never wavered in his support for Krebiozen.
Senator Douglas, why have you pressed for a National Cancer Institute test?
Well, the National Cancer Institute has tested over 1,000 chemical products and spent over $40 million in doing this. And I believe that the record of Krebiozen justified its being one of this 1,000. Its chief sponsor is Dr. Andrew C. Ivy, one of the great scientists of this nation, with an unblemished reputation. I have seen many, many cases of people who had been on death's door, who have, after taking Krebiozen, been improved. And I have gone over the statistical records and have found that with competent medical assistance, a great deal of evidence to indicate that it has been beneficial. I felt that all of these factors justified a test. I've never said it was a cure. As a matter of fact, Dr. Ivy's never said it was a cure. I've been open-minded on the subject, but I felt that the Cancer Institute, having tested over 1,000 chemical preparations, could test this.
Why have you persisted, Senator, when the weight of medical opinion has been so strongly against Krebiozen?
Well, medical opinion has been against virtually every great step forward in the field of medicine. This was true when Harvey discovered the circulation of the blood and Jenner developed the antitoxin against smallpox. It was true when Semmelweis and Oliver Wendell Holmes Sr. pointed out that the reason why women died in childbirth was because the hands of doctors were dirty, and went on to where Pasteur discovered the germ theory of disease, Lister antiseptic surgery, and Koch diagnosed tuberculosis. All of these men were fought by the medical profession and nearly driven out of organized medicine. One of them was actually hastened to his death because of the activities of medicine. The medical people are highly conservative, and the pundits in medicine, the medical politicians, do not like innovation. There are a lot of other circumstances in this particular Krebiozen case which may implicate the American Medical Association itself, but I shall not mention them. I'll merely say that this is too important a subject to be left purely to medical politicians.
Do you believe that the National Cancer Institute report is the final word on Krebiozen?
Well, I don't know. I'm studying that report with competent medical assistance. But there are certain features connected with the report that I regard as unfortunate. In the first place, although I requested it, Dr. Ivy was not permitted to testify or appear before this secret group which met on the matter. In the second place, there is a clear contradiction between the analysis of Krebiozen made last winter by the National Cancer Institute and the present analysis made by the Food and Drug Administration. The National Cancer Institute said that Krebiozen had 22% carbon in it. The Food and Drug Administration said it had 38% carbon. And the government is claiming that both of these are correct, which obviously cannot be possible. Now, Food and Drug is saying that Krebiozen is purely creatine. I don't know about this, but the previous tests indicated that it was not purely creatine, and there can be slight biological differences which produce tremendous differences in effects. I would say this report needs to be scrutinized and all the evidence evaluated.
On December 5th, 1963, Senator Douglas's committee found that the report the government made on Krebiozen was unfair, inaccurate, and prejudiced, stating also that the Cancer Institute imposed unduly harsh and severe standards of judgment upon Krebiozen. The report went even further, saying that the microscopic image the FDA released to the press, saying that they showed identical spectrograms for creatine and Krebiozen, was a misrepresentation of the truth. A reminder that conflating creatine with Krebiozen is about as bad as mistaking a human for a chicken. Senator Douglas maintained his stance that Krebiozen was still due a fair trial, and that the government should provide proof that Krebiozen is unsafe or ineffective. At the trial in November of 1964, the government went to Chicago's Federal District Court and leveled 49 indictments against the Krebiozen Foundation, Dr. Jurovic, Dr. Jurovic's brother, who had worked as his lawyer and financer, Dr. Ivy, and their new ally, Dr. Phillips. The indictments were later reduced to 42. The charges included mail fraud, conspiracy to defraud the public, and submitting false statements to government agencies. The government claimed that the Jurovic brothers had made millions and stored the money in Swiss banks. The prosecution claimed that the defendants had encouraged patients to visit Chicago, then given them Krebiozen to take home to their local doctors, which was illegal if the patient had crossed a state line. Despite the evidence the prosecution had given to the court, the jury came to a verdict that the defendants were innocent on all accounts. Although they walked away without facing formal sanctions, I want to mention from my own experiences that legal fights can be extremely stressful. I endured a legal case when I was 19 which obstructed me from getting help for my autism and post-traumatic stress disorder, and the legal fight made me suicidal. If you recall our documentary on Royal Raymond Rife, the pain from fighting and winning his case against the AMA mentally destroyed him for over a decade. Dr. Ivy declared he would continue treating patients, while Dr. Phillips said he would not until he knew that he was allowed under FDA law. Not long after being acquitted, Dr. Jurovic was indicted again for tax evasion. Rather than face another lawsuit, he left the United States. A sour way to end his time in the land of opportunity. We were not able to find out if Krebiozen is legal or not in Illinois today. As we mentioned in our Harry Hoxsey documentary, the way the medical establishment interacted with Dr. Ivy drew the ire of Senator Benedict Fitzgerald, who condemned them. This was explored by Kenny Ausubel in a seminar in 1990. Jurovic and Ivy are not the only doctors to face major opposition from the medical establishment. Through our research, we found that Royal Raymond Rife, Harry Hoxsey, Denisha Gadali, and many others have been derided and belittled for their research. It is our goal to show everyone the history of these people and their ideas. This marks the end of our 5th documentary. I put it to you that if you found this video informative, then sharing and subscribing would be helpful. Thanks for watching.